Past hour breaking overnight, Russia pummeled Kyiv and other parts of Ukraine with a barrage of missiles and drones. It was the biggest attack in the capital in months. Take a look at these pictures. At least 12 people were killed. Dozens of others were injured. President Trump insisting moments ago that President Putin is listening to him, after saying on social media earlier that he is not happy about the Kyiv attack and pushing Putin to make a deal with Ukraine. This after the president suggested yesterday that President Zelensky is to blame for the lack of a deal between Russia and Ukraine. Both the U.S. and Russia are pushing Ukraine to make territorial concessions, including leaving Crimea in Russian hands. Joining us now, NBC News Chief Foreign Affairs and Washington correspondent Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, always great seeing you. So this barrage overnight of missiles and drones was the antithesis of anything that could be possibly a light towards peace.
And it's inexplicable. Putin has all of these advantages. He's got a highly favorable peace offer from the U.S. He has not agreed to the ceasefire. President Zelensky's response today, he was traveling in South Africa when this happened and rushed home because of it. His response was, it's been 44 days since the U.S. proposed a ceasefire, and Ukraine, Zelensky, immediately agreed to it. And Vladimir Putin has not. So now they're not only ramping up the missile barrage, which has been continuous during those 44 days, but attacking Kyiv, the capital, which is not something that ordinarily has happened at this stage in the war. It certainly signals to the contrary of what the U.S. is saying, of what the president is saying, that Putin wants peace and is ready for peace, and that Zelensky, he said last night in an Oval Office photo op, he said, Zelensky has been harder than Putin. Well, it's certainly not the case in terms of who's willing to stop the missiles and stop shooting and who isn't.
And so, meanwhile, we see that the president's envoy, Steve Witkoff, is expected to meet with Putin in Russia again tomorrow. This is a fourth or fifth meeting. What do we know about that? And is there the equivalent of that towards the Ukrainians?
No, and not at all. In fact, a high-level meeting where there were high officials from Ukraine, the foreign minister, and Zelensky's personal representative, Andrei Yermak, were in London for that meeting, which was supposed to be with Witkoff and Rubio and the foreign ministers from Germany, France, and the UK. And instead, it was Rubio announced that he wasn't going and that Witkoff wasn't going. Well, that meant, since the U.S. had called the meeting, that this London meeting was downgraded to a meeting of technical experts. Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, the special envoy of the president to the State Department, represented the U.S., but it was not nearly at the level that it would have been. And the offer itself highly favors Russia because it would let the U.S. recognize the sovereignty of Crimea, which was taken by Russia, invaded and occupied in 2014, and give up probably 18 to 20% of territory that is considered Ukrainian territory, and as well bar Ukraine from ever joining NATO. So it's not considered a favorable offer at all, or an even-handed offer for Ukraine as the victim to an aggressor. And it's Ukraine that is being asked to pay a very heavy price by signing it and being pressured by, let me just say very quickly, that the implicit threat here is if the president's impatience until today and this overnight strike by Putin, but if his impatience with Zelensky continues to ramp up as it did yesterday, that the real implicit threat is that the U.S. would pull out, cut off the talks, and again withdraw military aid and intelligence, which would be a terrible blow to Ukraine.
And Andrea, that intelligence and aid, which could be at least balanced somewhat if the United States does pull back on that by the Europeans, it seems as though, Andrea, and I'm curious about your thoughts, how Europe is playing less and less of a role in much of this. Yes, there are the meetings in Paris, and yes, there are the discussions, but in actual help and effective assistance, it seems as though they're not playing a part, and Saudi Arabia is playing more of a part.
Well, the U.S. has cut Europe out completely until just last week. There was that first meeting, and then the second meeting was supposed to be, as you know, yesterday. They're doing it directly, and that's because Europe is very critical of this U.S. proposal. So, as we understand it from, I was talking to leaders, European leaders as well, last night. European leaders are really siding with Ukraine that this is not balanced, and they've been cut out of it. They're ready to step up, but they don't have the air defenses and the intel that we can provide or are providing. And the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte will be meeting at 3 o'clock this afternoon at the State Department with Marco Rubio. I'll be there. We'll see what happens.
Andrea, you know, I keep coming back to the fact that when I get a chance to speak with you, I could do this all day because it's always such a
mutual.
treat. Thanks,
Thank you,
Andrea.
Jose.
It's great to speak with you.
best.
I appreciate your time.
Thanks.
You as well.